They call Birmingham the Magic City, but the real magic here is twisted. Beneath the grit of the Steel City, the furnaces burn cold. From the Sloss shadow where iron men died screaming,
to the forgotten corners of the Tutwiler tonight,
we breach the veil. These are the top 10 places where Birmingham's ghosts refuse to rest. Redmont Hotel, Birmingham. The Redmont Hotel, opening in 1925, stands as Birmingham's oldest operating institution. Its opulence attracted high society and figures driven to despair by the crash of 1929. Historical records confirm several fatal incidents involving guests who utilized the hotel's height to end their lives. Staff speak of a profound, lingering sadness that permeates the upper guest floors, a psychic residue of sudden, violent departures. This distress is reportedly concentrated around rooms facing the alleyways, where the final, desperate impacts occurred decades ago. The most consistent manifestation centers on the 12th floor. Witnesses describe a faint female silhouette often appearing in peripheral vision near the elevator banks late at night. A figure sometimes smelling faintly of ozone and expensive perfume. This entity is widely believed to be the spirit of a socialite who jumped from the roof gardens during the Depression. Security footage, when reviewed following activation of motion sensors in vacant hallways, has occasionally captured anomalies. Brief, dense shadows that seem to absorb light, moving too quickly and irregularly to be equipment malfunction. Guests frequently report the sensation of being watched from the corner of the room, a cold pressure near the bed. The management of the Redmont maintains a professional silence on these occurrences, treating them as part of the heritage of a landmark structure. Yet, the persistent chill and the recurring sight of keys misplaced or doors inexplicably ajar serve as constant reminders that not all former residents checked out. The Redmont does not merely operate in history. Parts of its tragic past continue to operate within its walls, manifesting as silence where sound should be, and movement where there should only be stillness. 2. Sloss Furnaces, Birmingham. From its activation in 1882 until its final closure in 1971, Sloss Furnaces served as the industrial heart of Birmingham, Alabama, a massive, unforgiving complex of blast furnaces and casting sheds. The operational statistics reveal a relentless, lethal environment. The constant 0-degree heat, toxic gas clouds, an omnipresent danger of the molten slag led to frequent, often undocumented fatalities. Workers who succumbed to the noxious gases or fatal falls were sometimes simply buried on site, their passing noted only in hushed conversations. The systemic disregard for safety created a foundation of suffering that, according to parapsychological investigations, remains energetically imprinted on the very structure, particularly within the blower building and boiler house areas where the environment was most severe. The most persistent and aggressively documented entity associated with the site is the foreman James Slag Wormwood. Wormwood, who supervised the arduous night shifts, was known for his extreme cruelty, often forcing laborers, predominantly black men, back into dangerous areas during maintenance. In the early 1900s, Wormwood suffered a catastrophic fall, either into a vat of molten slag or off a high catwalk near the casting house. His death was gruesome and immediate. The physical body was destroyed, but the oppressive presence endured, with reports of spectral shouting beginning almost immediately after his demise. Modern incidents, meticulously documented by the Sloss Furnace Association and various law enforcement agencies, detail targeted physical harassment. Visitors and security personnel have been violently shoved downstairs near the pipe shop and the elevated walkways, often accompanied by guttural shouting, instructing them to get back to work. Furthermore, numerous individuals working near the catwalks have reported encountering a scarred, disfigured figure who appears to monitor their actions before disappearing back into the steam and shadow. a spectral supervisor eternally enforcing the unforgiving, fatal mandates of the Gilded Age. The site is not merely haunted, it is a defunct industrial complex still governed by a deceased, malevolent authority figure. 3. Linn Park, Birmingham. Linn Park occupies the ancient estate grounds surrounding the ruins of Hagg's Castle. The historical record confirms land use dating back to medieval times, often linked to periods of severe social upheaval. The persistent modern reports of localized paranormal activity align geographically with the park's heavily wooded areas, specifically the steep embankment leading down to the Auld House Burn. This area, locally known as the Witch's Hollow, is where the first serious claims of auditory phenomena began in the late 1970s, establishing the location as a persistent locus of disturbance that often aligns with the structure of vanished ancient crossing points within the estate. The dominant narrative centers on an apparition known as the Hag's Lament. She is described not as a classical white lady, but as a spectral figure in dark, soaked garments, usually manifesting near the cascading waterfall adjacent to the castle ruins. Documentation from the Glasgow Society of Paranormal Investigation includes over a dozen corroborated accounts between 1988 and 2005 describing a profound, suffocating sense of grief preceding the manifestation. Witnesses consistently describe the figure as appearing heavily burdened, her gaze fixed toward the water. Folklore suggests she was a mother who lost her children either during a flash flood or due to disease related to the stagnant burn water, her spirit forever anchored to the tragedy. The terror is not primarily visual, but psychological, the transference of unimaginable sorrow onto the observer. Contemporary researchers acknowledge that the ancient geophysics of the park, including the rumored Sabbath Stone burial site, may contribute to the energy necessary for such persistent residual haunting. While the grounds are public, authorities advise extreme caution near the embankments after dusk. The Hag's Lament is considered an entity of profound despair, not aggression. Yet exposure to her manifestation has been correlated with severe temporary anxiety and documented cases of acute depression in sensitive individuals. The park, in this specific locale, acts as a mechanism for projecting historical, internalized suffering onto the present-day visitor. 3. Tutwiler Hotel, Birmingham. The original Tutwiler Hotel, opened in 1914, was a monument to Birmingham luxury, but it faced a brutal decline culminating in its 1974 demolition. During its decay, the structure became the site of a specific recorded tragedy, the desperate suicide of a woman who either fell or jumped from an upper window. The emotional trauma of this vertical descent is the foundation of the location's persistent haunting. When the current structure was built, bearing the original name, it appeared to inherit this residual energy, anchoring the disturbance to the physical footprint. Documentation of paranormal activity is characterized by subtle, nonviolent movements and auditory phenomena. Housekeeping staff report objects, particularly glassware or antique display pieces, having been moved across locked rooms, and doors consistently found ajar moments after security checks. Guests occupying the upper floors often report recurring phantom footsteps and the distinct sound of muffled crying emanating from empty corridors late at night, frequently near the main elevator shafts. The most consistent manifestation involves the feeling of profound displacement near the original building's historical location. Individuals standing near this nexus sometimes report a sudden, acute sensation of falling a sharp, dizzying pressure that registers the final, kinetic terror of the suicidal plunge before instantly dissolving. The Tutwiler does not house a ghost in the traditional sense. It holds a localized, indelible recording of a final, violent goodbye, eternally replaying the momentum of despair. The Jordan Home, Dr. Mortimer Jordan, Birmingham. The Jordan Home, a cornerstone of Birmingham aristocracy and early 20th century progress, masks a profound unease. Dr. Mortimer Jordan, a celebrated physician, ensured the grand residence on Redmont Road was also a functional extension of his practice. The third floor, specifically, was utilized not just for servants' quarters, but as a private, high-ceilinged infirmary, a sterile space for procedures too sensitive or urgent for the public hospital. This functional overlap blurred the lines between domestic sanctuary and clinical austerity, setting the stage for the lingering disturbance that permeates the house today. The atmosphere is less one of domestic haunting and more of professional dread. Local history, often whispered by estate custodians and past residents, pinpoints the source of the trauma to an unnamed female assistant who served the doctor. She died inside the third-floor infirmary, whether by tragic accident during an experimental procedure or a silent, unrecorded illness contracted within those cold walls. The consequence is unmistakable. Her spectral presence remains strictly confined to the upper operating suite. Staff report the chilling, rhythmic clatter of instruments continuing long after midnight, sounds of preparation and perpetual service that defy physics. Witnesses also report the faint but distinct smell of ether lingering near the attic stairs, followed by the deep, exhausted sigh of a woman standing just out of sight. The air pressure drops sharply around the antiquated examination table. The Jordan home, built on ambition and medical necessity, now merely houses the ghost of overworked duty, a clinical attachment to a life stolen by the very work meant to save others. 6. Linn-Henley Research Library, Birmingham. The Linn-Henley Research Library, centerpiece of the Birmingham Public Library System, houses the vast historical and archival record of Jefferson County. Built during an era of significant civic ambition, the structure's stone facade belies a persistent, internally localized anomaly concerning unauthorized personnel activity. Staff reports, filed consistently over the last 2 decades, detail phenomena centered predominantly on the restricted access levels and the third-floor stacks containing the most dense collections of primary source materials. These incidents exceed standard structural settling noises or atmospheric drafts. The recurring entity is frequently described as a figure of minimal color saturation, a gray man, often mistaken for a janitorial or maintenance worker long after the closing hours. Security logs confirm multiple instances of triggered internal motion sensors that correlate directly with employee accounts of unexplained footsteps and the sound of keys rattling in areas verified as empty upon subsequent inspection. Archival technicians working late have documented sudden, sharp temperature differentials exceeding 15 degrees Fahrenheit in specific aisles. Immediately preceding the brief, clear scent of pipe tobacco. Despite strict prohibitions against smoking within the facility, this presence is generally perceived as passive, yet territorial, perhaps a residual manifestation of a former custodian anchored to his decades of duty. Linn-Henley, by its very function, collects the city's residue. The consensus among long-term staff is that the entity is less a malice and more an immovable artifact of the institution's past, perpetually cataloging the silence between the shelves, ensuring that the history stored there is never truly left alone. 7. Jim Reed Books, Birmingham. Jim Reed Books, long located in downtown Birmingham, was less a retail space and more an archive of forgotten memory. For over 70 years, Jim Reed presided over a labyrinthine accumulation of rare texts and occult ephemera, a density of historical data that many believed caused a spiritual compression within the structure itself. The atmosphere was perpetually stale, thick with the scent of decaying paper and the cold. Unmoving air typical of deeply haunted spaces. Employees seldom stayed long, reporting a constant, unnerving feeling of being watched, especially near the narrow back aisles dedicated to pre-1900 Southern history and theology. This was where the residual energy was strongest, centered on volumes that had passed through too many silent, careful hands. The most consistent manifestation reported by staff and regular customers was not violent, but chillingly methodical. They called her Agnes, sometimes linking her to a librarian who may have managed the space when it housed a different municipal function decades prior. Agnes's activity was always focused on the stock. Employees would close the shop, leaving chaotic stacks as was customary, only to return finding entire sections meticulously reshelved overnight or worse. Dangerously high pillars of heavy, rare volumes balanced impossibly in the center of the main floor. The meticulousness was the horror. It suggested a deliberate, focused consciousness still performing a task that transcended its own death. A ghost intensely committed to cataloging the forgotten narratives. The physical danger from Agnes's obsessive, spectral reorganizing was real. In 2007, a heavy history tome was reportedly hurled from a high shelf, narrowly missing a researcher. Documented claims suggest that Agnes, frustrated by attempts to disrupt her work or discard certain books, becomes actively hostile. The consensus among local paranormal investigators is that the shop functions as a high-pressure container for the city's unquiet history, and Agnes is merely its silent, proprietary warden. Oscar Wells Memorial, Birmingham. The Oscar Wells Memorial Auditorium, dedicated in 1951, stands as a brutalist testament to Birmingham's mid-century civic expansion. While the upper tiers hosted everything from rock concerts to crucial civil rights rallies, the structure conceals extensive sub-levels necessary to manage the massive utility infrastructure. Since the 1970s, maintenance logs have consistently noted anomalies that defy standard operational explanations. Reports filed by union workers detail persistent, localized drops in ambient temperature, sometimes plummeting 40 degrees within minutes in areas adjacent to the main stage fly tower, often coinciding with total system failures of surveillance equipment and localized power surges. These events are consistently tracked to the early morning hours, typically between 2 and 4 am. The most disturbing phenomenon centers on the deep ventilation shafts located beneath the orchestra pit, accessing the original, sealed basement level. Technicians tasked with quarterly inspections report hearing faint, rhythmic percussion originating deep within the ductwork. Too precise to be structural settling, it is described as deliberate knocking, consistent with traditional signals for distress. Historical records confirm that during the rapid construction phase, safety protocols were often ignored, and at least one documented fatality occurred when a major utility pipe ruptured in the basement levels, trapping an unnamed laborer. Employees now refer to the sound simply as the measure. When the knocking begins, it often follows the precise, staccato beat of a human heart under duress, usually tapering off only when the section is completely powered down and sealed off from access. Official management directives strictly prohibit discussion of these structural phenomena, classifying them merely as acoustic bleed or thermal inconsistencies related to aging utility lines. Despite this mandated silence, the anecdotal evidence persists across decades of facility staff turnover. The chilling echoes of the past remain trapped within the concrete and steel, a perpetual, silent emergency signal emanating from the deepest, least visited cavity of the memorial, dedicated to a man long deceased, yet forever marked by the casualty forgotten before the first curtain was ever raised. Arlington House, Arlington Historic House and Gardens, Birmingham. Arlington House, constructed in the 1840s, remains one of Birmingham's most significant antebellum structures, a physical relic of the Old South that sits preserved against the modern city. Its historical notoriety peaked during the Civil War when Union General James H. Wilson commandeered the property as his headquarters. It was during this tense occupation that the violence cemented itself into the estate's fabric. In April 1865, General Wilson's aide, Captain George W. Taylor, was shot and killed on the grounds. The historical record suggests he was executed, either by Confederate sympathizers or possibly by Union deserters, dying quickly in or near the parlor where his blood reportedly stained the original floorboards. The residual haunting attributed to Captain Taylor is one of Alabama's most frequently documented historical apparitions. Witnesses, often staff or conservationists working alone in the late hours, describe seeing a pale, uniformed man standing silently near the main staircase or in the parlor threshold. The figure is consistently described as bearing a severe, chest-level wound, often manifesting alongside the faint but unmistakable scent of spent gunpowder and oxidized blood. Though meticulous forensic investigation confirms no physical trace of the incident remains in the preserved architecture, the phenomenon is not aggressively malevolent, but rather a somber, continuous loop of a final, violent moment. Curators attempting overnight preservation work report unexplained cold spots, persisting even near active heat sources, focused often in the exact locations of documented historical tragedy. Doors lock themselves from the inside, and period furniture has been heard to rattle without external stimulus. The historical integrity of Arlington House is maintained, yet the persistent, documented presence of Captain Taylor ensures that the violence of the war never truly left this preserved space, standing sentinel over the final tragedy of April 1865. Oak Hill Cemetery, Birmingham. Oak Hill Cemetery, established in 1871, serves as the primary repository for Birmingham's earliest history, housing politicians, industrialists, and veterans of the Confederacy. It is not merely a resting place, but a living, albeit decaying, archive of the city's foundational traumas, particularly those tied to the industrial boom and the rapid, often tragic, development of the Deep South. The grounds, especially the older Victorian plots and the Confederate section, exhibit an unusual constant temperature drop, even on the warmest Alabama nights, a phenomenon often dismissed by groundskeepers, but frequently noted by researchers, focusing on residual energy fields and historical atmospheric stress. The documented disturbances primarily cluster near the massive granite mausoleums of the founding families and along the central terraced slope. Witnesses ranging from casual tourists to academic preservationists working after dark have repeatedly reported disembodied whispers, often sounding like strained, historical Southern dialect, emanating from sealed vaults that structurally could not sustain echoes. The most unsettling recurring phenomenon is the sighting of an anachronistic, tall figure in dark, pre-1900s dress, observed perpetually pacing the upper ridge. This figure, locally known as the overseer, never interacts. It only watches the maintenance crews below, its presence accompanied by an oppressive sense of surveillance and static electricity strong enough to consistently interfere with modern digital recording equipment. Investigators attempting to identify the source of these persistent high-frequency audio signatures and cold spots have found no conclusive evidence linking them to known natural occurrences or local infrastructure. The cemetery's documented energy seems directly proportional to the historical weight it carries, a cumulative effect of cholera deaths, explosive industrial accidents, and the deep-seated societal violence inherent in Birmingham's genesis. Oak Hill is a place where history does not simply rest. It actively insists on its relevance, manifesting not as a playful apparition, but as a persistent, cold anxiety clinging to the Alabama dust, documenting its own unending trauma. That wraps up our bone-chilling countdown of the top 10 haunted places in Birmingham, Alabama. From spectral laborers at Sloss Furnaces to the rumored restless residents of the Tutwiler Hotel. It's clear the Magic City holds more secrets than we can count. But the investigation doesn't stop here. Which of these terrifying 10 deserves a full, on-site, overnight probe? Make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because next time, we're packing our ghost hunting gear and heading straight into one of these legendary haunts. Let us know in the comments below which Birmingham ghost story you want us to investigate next.